Hello, my name is Kathy Creighton. I'm the Executive Director of the Butler County Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you to today's talk, and we're going to be talking about the ghosts of the Benninghofen. So, is the Butler County Historical Society haunted? When I started at this Historical Society 10 years ago, I was warned that the house was haunted, but I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, and I thought, oh, people are just crazy. But then I had a visitor that came, and she came several times. The last time she was there, she looked at me and she says, "Is this place haunted?" I said, "Well, what do you think?" She said, "Every time I've come, I have seen a young lady standing at the top of the staircase, and as she descends, a young man is waiting for her at the bottom of the staircase." I thought, well, she's just a little bit crazy. You know, what do you think? Ghosts don't exist. Well, then I had a reporter from Channel 12 in Cincinnati come. They were doing a story on the 100th anniversary of the burning of the courthouse in 2012. And she'd never been there before. And I said, "Well, would you like to do a tour of the house while you're here?" She said, "Sure." We got upstairs. This is the master bedroom. And she got as far as the door of the master bedroom, stopped dead in her tracks, turned around, and went running back down the stairs. I followed her and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I don't know," but she said, "Something doesn't want me in this bedroom." And I thought, okay, what'd you do? Have a liquid lunch before you came? Whatever. So I dismissed it. Then I had my own experience. It was in November, late in the afternoon. I came up the stairs and wanted to make sure all the lights were turned off. As you can see in this picture, there's display cases in the hall. Well, when I came around the corner, the display cases were gone, and I saw two little girls playing in the hall. The one little girl had her back to me, but she reminded me of the Samantha doll from the American Girls. She had long brown hair, she was in a jumper, she was sitting down, and the moment I spotted her, she disappeared. At that point, I was beginning to wonder whether I was working too hard or what the problem was. So finally, in the year 2013, we had our first paranormal investigation. The name of the group was Triops, and they were going to live stream us. They were there for 2 nights checking out the Historical Society, and they were going to work with, they had brought in 3 different psychics. We were working with divining rods, we were working with voice synthesizer boxes. This was all new to me. I didn't know what this stuff was, but this is what we were working with. This is an example of using divining rods in the formal parlor at the Benninghofen House. With the rods, you hold them, they are free swinging, and you can only ask simple questions. Usually we say if the answer is yes, you cross the rods, which is what you see here. If it's no, you spread them apart. They can point to where they are in the room, and that just basic simple communications is what you're able to do. Well, when we had the investigation, I wanted to make sure we had a skeptic with us. So we invited Richard O. Jones, who at that time was a reporter for the Hamilton Journal, and he didn't believe in any of this. And so he comes to us, stays for the entire investigation, and then by the time we're done, he was a believer that the Benninghofen House was haunted. So who or what haunts the Benninghofen House? Well, our first spirit that we're going to talk about normally stays in the formal parlor. She is known to also go out in the hall and visit the dining room. And we found out that she is Wilhelmina Benninghofen, the wife of John Benninghofen, the 3rd owners of the home. She's pictured here with her oldest son, Christian. And according to the psychics that can see the ghosts, this is the age that she is appearing at in the house. She is seated in the parlor, and this is another picture of Wilhelmina. She went by the name of Mina instead of Wilhelmina, and we know that she, John, and 3 of their children died in the Benninghofen house. This was typical during the time. You did not go to the hospital to die. Usually you were at home and that's where you died. We know that she dies of paralysis, is what is on her death certificate. We're assuming that means she probably had a stroke. Now, it was interesting, we've had numerous paranormal investigations since, and one that we did last October of 19, they had a camera that could pick up stick figures, and we were actually supposedly picking up the stick figure of Wilhelmina in the formal parlor. She was showing herself laying on the floor in the formal parlor. And we've come to the conclusion that this means she's trying to tell us that she probably had the stroke in the formal parlor of the Benninghofen House, and she's trying to show us how she died. What's interesting about Wilhelmina, she's very, very chatty. She normally is seated in either the settee that you see straight ahead, or a lot of times in the red chair there along the fireplace. She is very much the Victorian lady. She only understands things that went on during her lifetime. So anything that's past about 1890, don't ask her because she doesn't understand. She is terrified of the vacuum cleaner because it makes so much noise. She's afraid it's going to suck her up. She gets upset because we have quit using the front door for tours. And she said in the Victorian time period, if you're coming for a formal visit, you would always come through the front door. Only tradespeople, salesmen, servants, things along this line would use the back doors she says we're using. So this bothers her. But she's also guarding something in this room. And in this room, to the left, that ring is Wilhelmina's wedding ring. The watch to the right belonged to her one daughter, Carrie. We keep these items in the formal parlor. Well, she's guarding them because if we have a big group, we usually will hide them in there. And she's afraid they're going to be stolen. She does not want these things to be stolen. I made the mistake once during the Christmas walk of taking the items, putting in my office, and forgetting to bring them back. 4 months later, one of the psychics came through and said, Wilhelmina's mad at you. And I said, why is she mad at me? What did I do now? They said, you know what you did. And I'm like, oh no, what did I do? So I'm thinking this through, and it dawned on me that the wedding ring and the watch were still in my office. I said, I'll be right back. Went and got the wedding ring and the watch, put them back on the table. She says, she's happy now, but she says, don't do it again. I'm like, okay. I will tell you that one of the psychics, when we first brought the ring back to the house, did not know what the ring was. We didn't tell her because if you look at it, that's a blue sapphire in the ring. It doesn't really look like a wedding ring. And she took it out of the box, but she didn't put it on the finger you would for a wedding ring. She put it on her pinky finger, and it was sitting in the dining room at the time. And she said, all of a sudden, she said she got the strongest urge to take the wedding ring into the formal parlor. She took it off and laid it on the table. She says, this is where Wilhelmina wants this item to be. Another interesting thing that we did with Wilhelmina, this is the Benninghofen silverware. We only have 4 pieces of it, but we laid it on the table to see what if Wilhelmina would respond to it, because this was the first time we brought the silverware back into the dining room. Now, I'm sure that many of you know how to set a table formally, and many of you don't. If you look closely, the knife to the right, the regular knife, is facing the wrong direction. The blade is always supposed to point in towards the plate. Any Victorian woman would have known this. Well, I wanted to test the ghost and test the psychic, who was a 20-something, just to see what would happen by missetting the table. And she stopped and she was hovering her hand over the silverware. And she says, I keep getting this message from Wilhelmina. And she's saying, you know better, you know better, you know better. What's she talking about? I said, well, I don't know. You tell me, what's she talking about? And she went over the psychic, put her hand over the knife, flipped the knife over, and she says, now Wilhelmina's happy. She says, what is she talking about? I said, well, that's the correct way to set a table. And I said, she's telling me now that this is the correct way to set the table. Another interesting thing we had with Wilhelmina is that this is a film crew that used the Benninghofen House for over a week filming. They did their staging out of the formal parlor, which is where Wilhelmina usually sits. To the left is a Channel 12 news reporter who came down to do a talk on the film that they were filming. Now, what was interesting is the majority of the film crew were African American. And I'm going to be politically incorrect, but in the Victorian time period, unless you were invited into the formal parlor, you would not have been in the formal parlor. And in the circles that Wilhelmina would have traveled in, she would probably not have had any African-American friends that which she would consider inviting into the formal parlor. So she was upset that these people were in there and invading her space. And those of you that have seen other ghost shows, you know that ghosts can materialize themselves as orbs. I will tell you that I took 6 pictures to make sure I got a good one. And this is the only picture that I took that you can see the orbs in. So it's not dust, it's not anything else. The people that know about these things tell me that is Wilhelmina showing her anger at these people being in her formal parlor. Let's move on to our next guest. And it's interesting with him, he is in the library at the Benninghofen House, and we think he also goes out into the hall because I've had several guests say that they've been taking pictures of a picture that we have out on the wall, and when they get home and look at it, they see the outline of a Civil War soldier reflected in the glass. Well, we know that this particular ghost happens to be Brigadier General Ferdinand Vanderveer. He was born in Middletown, but lived most of his life here in Hamilton. When the Confederates fire on Fort Sumter and Lincoln calls for troops, Butler County responded with the 35th Ohio Volunteer Infantry that was known as the Butler Voice. He was the head of the unit. They spent the majority of their first part of the war guarding railroad stations and track lines in Tennessee and Kentucky. Then they get assigned to Sherman's March to the Sea, or to Sherman, and their first major battle is at Chickamauga. By this time, Vanderveer has been promoted to a general, and he is given the orders to hold the line so that the majority of the Union forces can escape, because this is one of the last major defeats for the Union Army. Over half the 35th is killed, wounded, or captured at Chickamauga. Well, why do we think he is still haunting us at the Benninghofen House? Because the statue there on the stand is a bust of Vanderveer that stood in his home on South D Street. And in front of him is the spurs that he wore during the Civil War. Well, Vanderveer and his number 2 in command was a guy by the name of William Van S. Boynton from Cincinnati. They go back to Chickamauga in the 1870s for a reunion. And as they're riding around the Civil War battlefield, they realize that they're seeing that there's development, there's changes going on. And they realize that if the Civil War battlefields are not preserved, they're afraid people will forget why the Civil War was fought. So these 2 men come back and start lobbying the Department of the Interior. And thanks to them, so many of the Civil War battlefields today are part of the National Park Service. So I promised the spirit that I would tell his story to everyone that comes in, which I do dutifully. If you come in on my tour, I will tell you that I have to do this tour. Well, it was interesting, about 3 years after I started doing the tour and found out that he was there, I went to Greenwood Cemetery the first time and stopped at his grave. This was part of a chautauqua that was being done by, I believe it was the Hamilton Theater Department or Theater Club in Hamilton. And Vanderveer's wife was one of the characters that they were reenacting. Well, as I'm standing there looking at Vanderveer's tomb, I said to myself, I hope you realize that I'm trying to tell your story and why it's important to know why the Civil War was fought. I felt a cold shiver go down my back, just like I said, it felt like he was crossing over. And today we have a hard time picking up Vanderveer's ghost. Once in a while we will pick him up, but he is not near the strong figure that he used to be at the Benninghofen House. So let's move upstairs on the house now and meet the two little girls that I actually saw. It's interesting. They like to play around in the upstairs. They like to play peekaboo with guests. It's interesting. Try playing peekaboo when you can't see who you're playing peekaboo with. But the two little girls are Anna and Isabella Owens. This is Isabella Owens, and we know that Isabella dies at the age of 57 in Columbus. She and her sister Anna lived at 224 North 2nd Street. Their father was Job Owens, and those of you from Hamilton know who Owens and Rentschler, that was Daddy. And so they came from a well-to-do family. This is Anna. She is the one that I asked the psychic when we first determined the two little girls were up there. I said, ask Anna if she is the one I saw. And she says, yes, she's shaking her head and giggling and saying, yes, she is the spirit that you saw. Plus, she likes to follow you around. Whenever you're upstairs, she's usually tied to your right hip, following you around. Anna, we know a little bit more about than we do. Her sister Isabella. Anna, after the 1913 or during the 1913 flood, she was over in Paris studying. She's a graduate from Vassar College here in the United States, very much into the arts. She comes back to Hamilton after the 1913 flood, and she spends most of her time in the pursuit of the arts here. This is their house that was on North 2nd Street. We know that it was flooded during the 1913 flood. When Anna comes back, she goes ahead and sells the house. It becomes one of the nurses' dorms for Mercy Hospital. The building is no longer standing today. Well, if Isabella, or she went by Bella, dies at the age of 57, and Anna lives all the way up into her 80s, why are they here and why are they at this age? Well, first of all, their pictures are hanging in the bedroom, the master bedroom on the 2nd floor of the Benninghofen House. We are here, they are here at the age that you see them in the pictures. And we think we have finally discovered the reason why they are here at this age. We've been trying to do more research on Bella because we know nothing about her other than she died in Columbus in 1957. So in the last couple of weeks, I've been searching her. I finally found her on the 1910 census. She and Anna were still living with their mother. They were in their 20s on the house on North 2nd Street. By the 1920 census, Isabel is now listed as living in Columbus. And when I found it, I thought, good, let's see what the information is, find out what the address. And I looked at it, I was horrified. She was listed as an inmate. So I went to the top of the page, and she was at the home in Columbus for the feeble-minded. We don't know what her affliction was, schizophrenic, super depressed. We don't know what it is. But we think that that is why the two little girls are at the age that they are in the pictures, because this is the time that they were the happiest. Both of the girls today are buried at Greenwood Cemetery. So let's move on to our next ghost. And if you see there above the desk, that's Anna's portrait. Isabella's over in the left where you can't see it. But this poor ghost, the little girls we think drive nuts with their giggling and running up and down the hall because he is sitting at the desk trying to work. Our ghost is James Mcbride, first mayor of Hamilton, secretary of Miami College in Oxford for 25 years. He's the person Mcbride Hall is named for, a surveyor, a history writer. He is known for his pioneer biography of early settlers of Butler County. He is known for the maps he did of the Native American earthworks that are here in this area. And we owe a lot of the history that we know of early Butler County, we owe a lot of thanks to James Mcbride. And a lot of this would have been at his desk. Now, it's interesting with Mr. Mcbride, this is him later in life, you don't touch his desk. He gets very upset when you touch his desk. If he is not wanting to be disturbed when we come through with the tour, the first thing I do is get a headache in the room. The minute I leave the room, the headache disappears. He's been known to touch people during tours. He's been known to push people during tours. He especially likes to pick on Miami female graduates with blonde hair, we've discovered. Why, we don't know. But what was interesting is one of the other paranormal groups we had a voice synthesizer in the room. And as if you've watched the TV shows, you know they like to provoke the spirits. Well, they were going to provoke Mr. Mcbride. He kept telling him to get out, get out, get out. And they kept provoking him, provoking him, provoking him. I'm looking at them going, look, you're leaving after tonight. I'm the one that has to live with this ghost. Please quit provoking him. And they said, well, why don't you ask him a question? And I thought, okay, who was the last president you remember? And it was very clear on the voice synthesizer. It came out Abraham Lincoln. I thought, yeah, okay, we've got the hoax, because he died before Lincoln took office, or so I thought. I went downstairs and did research, and it turns out James Mcbride died 2 weeks after Abraham Lincoln was elected to the president. Lincoln had not taken the presidency yet, because Mcbride dies in November. The election was in November, but at that time the inauguration was in March of the following year. So Abraham Lincoln would have been the last president that he remembered. Let's move on to the basement. Our next ghost was a dentist, and the tools there on the chair belonged to him. He told one of the psychics that he likes to help people, and he doesn't understand why they are afraid of dentists. Well, if you look at some of those dentist tools, they were pretty crude back there, and I'm terrified of the dentist now, but I'd really been terrified of the dentist. But his name is Charles Keeley, and he lived, was his house at 243 North 2nd Street. He was here in Hamilton during the 1913 flood. And what we have found with Dr. Keeley, he is very interested. Apparently, he is more aware of modern technology today, because he likes to come upstairs and stand behind the volunteer desk and loves to play with the printer. The printer will set itself off for absolutely no reason. The lights will come on and off. It'll shoot blank paper through. And we think that this is Dr. Keeley trying to get our attention or to play with the printer. Now this ghost, I call him our stand-up comic, and he is a Spanish-American War veteran. And when we first determined him, we were trying to find out who he was. And he told the psychic that in this picture, he is the second row from the bottom, second person from the left. The picture had on it Company K, Spanish-American War. We assumed when we were trying to find out who he was, that this was a Butler County unit that was formed for the Spanish-American War. It was donated by this man here, Mr. Willard Denning, and Mr. Denning had also donated his Spanish-American War uniform, which is at the monument, and a lot of other items, including this picture, and he was part of this Company D. Well, we couldn't find any Company Ds anywhere that served in the Spanish-American War. Well, we finally did a lot of searching and found that Company K was part of the National Guard. And they actually didn't serve until the Philippine insurrection, which was 2 years after the Spanish-American War. But for history purposes, a lot of times the Philippine insurrection, the Boxer Rebellion, and the Spanish-American War are lumped together. And so this is why we think that it was referred to as a Spanish-American War veteran. Here was the members of the unit. There's Willard Denning. He was a corporal. He's the person that donated all of this information. He was from Hamilton. When we started looking at the other peoples in the unit, none of the rest of them were from Hamilton, only Denning. And we're like, how are we going to determine who this guy is? So I showed you the divining rods at the beginning picture. So we went through and started asking at the top, going through all of the names. We kept going, no, 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 until we got down to Lloyd H. Taylor. We got a yes. And I'm like, okay, are you the ghost? He said yes. Well, if you look really carefully on that piece of paper where we had copied this, by Lloyd H. Taylor's name, there is a black mark. Someone else had already marked his name on this piece of paper, or somehow this name got marked. What is interesting about Mr. Taylor is he likes to play with the divining rods. People say, well, you are influencing the rods and causing them to work. Well, just think about holding the two rods still, one of them totally still, and the other one spinning like a top. This is what he likes to do, to play with the rods and to get our attention. Now, the next two spirits, I really want to make sure I stay on their good side. We know we have two Native American warriors at the Historical Society. The first one spends most of his time hanging around the drinking fountain. Why? We're not sure. And when we identified that there was a spirit here, of course, we're doing 20 questions trying to figure out who he is. And the lady hanging over the water fountain is Emma Ritchie. She is the person who donated the money to pay for the auditorium. And then we have Ollie Randall, who paid for the money that built our research library. And I have a bad habit of getting the two ladies mixed up. So I looked at Emma's picture and I said, are you here because of Emma Ritchie? And the psychic said, well, he's confused. And I said, oh, I'm confused. Are you here because of Ollie Randall? And she said, he's saying yes. Well, those of you that knew Ollie, she was very proud of the fact that she believed she was the great, great, great niece of the Shawnee war chief, Blue Jacket. This is a painting that Ollie did of Blue Jacket. And many of you may think Blue Jacket was a white man by the name of Marmaduke von Schweringen. This was believed for many, many years. And we actually can tell by looking at pictures of Ollie that she gave this painting the Schweringen features, the blue eyes, the nose, the mouth. He very much looks like a Schweringen. Well, we know for a fact, after DNA testing was done in the year 2017, that Marmaduke von Schweringen and Blue Jacket were not the same person. The DNA testing proved for a fact that Blue Jacket was 100% Shawnee. You go, well, how did this confusion happen? For many years, they thought Marmaduke had been captured by the Shawnee at the age of 17. And at the time he was captured, he was wearing a blue linsey woolsey jacket. So a reporter runs into a member of the Schweringen family out in the West in the 1890s. They're telling him the story of Marmaduke, and the reporter says, oh, you must be Blue Jacket. And of course, the Schweringen family, wanting the best, hoping for the best of what happened to their missing relatives, said, oh, yes. So as we know, fake news, it just continued to roll and roll and roll until it was accepted as the truth. And it wasn't until they did this DNA testing. Blue Jacket actually had two wives. The first one was a white woman. So of course his children would have been half-breeds. His second wife was the daughter of a French trader by a Shawnee woman. These children, of course, were at this point quarter breeds. And so it was known that his children were half-breeds. That was a historical fact. So everyone just always assumed that the white portion of it came from Blue Jacket, where it actually was from his wives. But today, we know the truth about Blue Jacket. So why is he at the Historical Society? Well, I think he was upset because people were still telling his story wrong. And he wants people to know that, no, I am not Marmaduke von Schweringen. I am actually 100% Shawnee. and I am the war chief, Blue Jacket. Now, our other Native American that is here is Little Turtle. And those of you that know the story of the Miami war chief, he and Blue Jacket were contemporaries. They fought together in the Indian coalition that battled General Harmer, General St. Clair, and Anthony Wayne. Little Turtle was the head of the coalition during the first two battles, and then Blue Jacket was the head of the coalition through the last battle. Well, after the peace treaty was signed, the Houston family is going to settle up in the area around Oxford, which is today Houston Woods. They wanted some sort of sign from the Indians in the area that they realized that they were there and they weren't going to attack them, something that they could show to other Native Americans if they came in and said, yes, we have permission to be here. Well, the closest Native Americans they could find was the Miami tribe. And so they asked Little Turtle at that point to give them some items to show. The one on the left is a tomahawk that belonged to Little Turtle. This has been substantiated by the Smithsonian Institution. And it would have been a ceremonial tomahawk. It would not have been used in battle, but it's also a peace pipe. The item to the right is a handmade shovel from the Miami Indians, and these are the two items that was given to the Houston family. We think that Little Turtle is tied to these two items because he never goes very far from our Native American exhibit that's in the basement of the auditorium, except that 2 years ago, we shipped the tomahawk to Columbus, to the State House, for a 6-month exhibit on the Native American story and on the Indians. Well, we think that Little Turtle went to Columbus with his tomahawk because we could not pick him up in the auditorium the whole time that he was gone. Now, what's kind of funny is you have to think where this exhibit was is the main entrance where all of the school children come through for the tours. I'm sure Little Turtle was beside himself seeing all these children come through, not understanding what's going on. And it was interesting because when we finally went and picked the items back up in Columbus, my husband, who does not believe in any of this, we're about halfway home from Columbus, and he jokingly says, well, I hope Little Turtle made sure he'd gotten he's in the back seat. And all of a sudden we heard a thud and stuff shift in the car, and we had not hit a bump. So my husband at that point says, I'm not talking about Little Turtle anymore. And this, of course, is Little Turtle, probably one of the best known pictures of him. We also find that we get ghosts in when we do special exhibits. During the World War I exhibit, this is material that belonged to John Graft of Hamilton. He was a doctor during the war. We didn't realize that he was there. We had gone in with the divining rods to see if anything was there. We got no response. But then his family showed up. It would have been his great niece and her children. They came in and they were looking at the exhibit. And of course, the kids are going to ask me, is the place haunted? And I said, well, what do you think? We went and got the divining rods. And when his great niece held the divining rods, they came alive. And we found out that he was there. He was very happy to see his family. He was very happy that his stuff was out on exhibit. And he was happy that people were telling his story. The minute the World War I exhibit came down, he's gone again. Now, we've had experiences with our World War II exhibit, but the last ghost I want to talk about is the one that is currently haunting us. We are working on an exhibit in the auditorium on the paintings of George W. White. All of the paintings you see here, with the exception of the lady in the white dress, were done by George W. White, but the paintings all came in from the Mckee family in Hamilton. And they were in the research area where most of my volunteers work. They kept saying, there's strange stuff going on in here. We feel like we're being watched. Every time they would open a book, the name Mckee would show up. They'd pull something out of the file. It would be Mckee. They're doing research on another family, find out the Mckees were the next door neighbors. the name Mckee just kept coming up, coming up, coming up. And we're like, okay, well, let's do some history on the family. Well, we went ahead and brought up the Mckee family box. We actually have 3 of them. But if you see the one in the center there, it says John Mckee, Civil War, and other letters. Well, I do another speakers bureau based off the Civil War letters that John Mckee wrote to his newlywed wife during the Civil War. When I was working on this speakers bureau on John Mckee, the box and the letters were sitting on my desk. One of the psychics came through, sat down in my office, sat right back up, put her hand on the box and said, he doesn't want you reading the letters. They are personal. He wants you to quit reading his letters. And I'm like, okay. Believe me, there's nothing really personal in the letters. He talks about life in camp. He talks about, he was very religious. He's always writing home what the topic of the sermon was to his wife. I don't think in any of the letters did I ever say, I love you or I miss you once, other than he was trying to get her to come down because at that time he was in Tennessee. But there was really nothing in there that I felt was really personal. Here's what some of the letters look like. This is John Mckee and his wife. But he is the son of the lady, the circular lady that was in the picture, and the brother of the man that was in the picture. So the whole Mckee family is all tied together. And we know now we've moved the boxes and the pictures out of the research library and into the auditorium where the exhibit is going to be. And my volunteers are very happy because the Mckees are no longer haunting in the research library. Just a little bit of follow-up on John Mckee. He comes back to Hamilton. He's wounded at the Battle of Stones River, is an invalid the rest of his life, appointed the postmaster here in Hamilton, and he is today buried at Greenwood Cemetery. So now I'm going to ask you the question. Do you think the Butler County Historical Society is haunted? I invite you to come in and visit us and meet the ghosts in person. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.